Week 2 is the best slate for NFL DFS because not only do we have data from Week 1, we have tangible data on usages, we know what teams want to do, but also we still get some inefficient salaries, we get people maybe not reacting fully to new roles, which means that Week 2 is a great spot to buy into players you believe in, take advantage of the data, and hopefully win some money. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire. Brandon, happy Week 2 to you. How you doing?
Good. We got a lot of good games. 13 games on the main slate, which is always a lot to go through. But thankfully, it kind of just drops off after the first 8 in terms of totals. And I'm always okay making a donkey-brained move and stacking games that have a low total. I don't think I have to do that this week because there are 8 viable games, and the odds that one of those bottom 5 are the game to stack seem very, very low.
And I think the good thing is we don't like differentiating for the sake of differentiating, because oftentimes you will be pushing yourself into suboptimal plays. This week you can differentiate without being suboptimal. Like the margin between the top plays at each position and the top games to stack is not that large. And so I can find ways to be different without making moves that violate my process. And I find that to be the best kind of slate. And it is tough because we've got like 16 different running backs who I want to use. I didn't count, but it feels like 16 different running backs I want to use. There are, like you said, all 8 games that have high totals are games I'm comfortable stacking. So we're going to break that down. We're going to talk about the running backs. We're going to talk about the games to stack and all of that in just one second. But first, we got a new little treat for everybody listening. It's a brand new contest available to FanDuel Podcast Network listeners, and I think you're going to like it. It is a rake-free paid contest exclusively for all of you. It is just a $5 entry fee, so it's for people of all bankroll sizes, and you can put in up to 3 lineups. There are just 400 entries, and first place gets $200. So if you want to go up against others in the FanDuel Podcast Network community, head on over and get yourself entered. You can find a link to the contest in the show notes over on numberFire.com, or you can go to FanDuel.com/league/listener league. That is FanDuel.com/league/listener league. FanDuel.com/league/listener league. Again, just $5 to enter, 3 entries max, and there is no rake. If you fill it quickly, we'll likely get a bigger contest for next week. So a listener league finally here on the FanDuel Podcast Network. FanDuel.com/league/listener, or just go to the show notes on numberFire.com. A link will be there. Get yourself entered so we can make this thing bigger for next week. Slate overview for week number 2. I think for me, Brandon, there are 2 main questions that are kind of driving my thoughts in this slate. The first one is, how do we handle the mid-tier and value backs, and can they generate enough points to outscore the studs? By studs, I mean the guys who are $8,000 or higher, because Derrick Henry and Zeke Elliott are going to be tough fades for this week. And the other thing is, how do we rank the potential shootouts on the slate from a stacking perspective? And I think those are 2 very tough questions. And I've been trying to fill out a single entry lineup. It is very difficult because there are so many plays I want to use. So Brandon, what are the key things impacting your view of this slate for week number 2?
Yeah, I alluded to it already, but there are 8 games with the over under of 47 or higher. And then, it's a big drop to 42.5. At least as of last night when I pulled those numbers. But that's a big jump. And again, I said it already that I usually try to find ways to differentiate, and I'm okay stacking games with lower totals. But I think I can just cut off 5 games really. Maybe there are some one-offs in those games, but we've got 8 really viable games to stack up. And I think for me, it's going to be really honing in on. I can't play all 8 and feel good about it because I'll be just everywhere, and that's not good process. Even if you're multi-entering a tournament, you kind of need to pinpoint a few games that you're higher on. So I need to figure that out. And then also with the running backs, kind of same boat. There are a lot of viable options, but pinpointing like a cash game or single entry, like the 3 that you're going to play, or 2 if you want, but we're going to play 3.
It's a running back in the flex week. Every week is, but like this week especially.
Yeah, I mean, there was like 1 week last year that we considered maybe not, but
Thanksgiving as well. But like this is not 3 games.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really going to be like figuring out where I'm honing in on the game stacks and the running backs.
And it's tough because like you do have to be very choosy. So I think that if you listen to this on Thursday, you've got time. What I would do is I would actually go in and rank the running backs based on salaries. If you do that and you can find which ones you want to prioritize throughout your lineups, that'll give you a pretty big leg up. So I would actually go through and rank. I would also rank the game stacks. And you mentioned the totals. The Rams-Eagles did drop out of that. The total fell down to 46, but that's one of my favorite games to stack anyway. So it's still the message is still resounding, and I agree because the total in that game or the spread in that game is very tight. So I think it's a very good game to stack, despite the fact the total did go down. But I would encourage you to actually sit down and physically rank out the running backs based on salary, and then rank out the stacks as well. That'll help you a lot for this week. Injuries to note. The big and obvious one is that Marlon Mack is on injured reserve, making Jonathan Taylor and Naheem Hines a focal point for the Colts. We'll talk about that in the trends discussion. Last week, it was Mike Evans. This week, it is Chris Godwin. Godwin is in concussion protocol and in danger of missing this week's game. They get the Panthers. That's a sick matchup for anyone. So how high will you be on Evans if Godwin misses? And can we get some Scotty Miller action if Godwin can't play?
Yeah, I'm a big Mike Evans guy, especially for DFS because he can get downfield targets, and we'll talk about some downfield information in a bit. But I think Mike Evans will be a great way to get access to an elite wide receiver ceiling, but at a salary of $7,400, he's not in the Devontae Adams range, so that helps me a lot. Obviously, I'm not going to be alone in loading up on Mike Evans after a down week. Just 4 targets, 2 of those came against Marshawn Lattimore, but I think it's a really big bounce back week for Mike Evans, kind of with or without Chris Godwin, honestly. And then for Scotty Miller, 82% of the routes last week. I think if there's no Godwin, Miller, I mean, you got a downfield target as well. I think Miller is definitely in play.
And it's not like Scotty Miller is just some scrub. He's not like, I would have put Russell Gage in this category previously of like a guy who's like out there running routes. But like Scotty Miller's like a legit athlete. Like he ran a 4.40, I believe. And he's $5,200. I do think that normally we will talk about when a key piece misses a game, it may downgrade the entire offense. That was true against New Orleans last week because they have Marshawn Lattimore and they have a legit defense. I don't feel that way about the Panthers. I think Tampa Bay will move the ball regardless of whether Godwin is out there or not. So I think Miller, $5,200, definitely a great play. But like you said, Evans, tremendous ceiling too. The Eagles are getting healthier. Lane Johnson and Miles Sanders both got in full practices on Wednesday after missing week number 1. Brandon, are you willing to trust Sanders at $6,800 against this Rams defense?
Trust? No. Will I consider him? Yes, especially in game stacks. I think there are better process plays from a trust and floor standpoint because we don't know what exactly the workload will look like if he holds up to a full workload. But he would be a very easy way to differentiate from all the other backs. That said, with 13 games on the main slate, even kind of 8 as the main games, popularity numbers, draft percentages should be pretty flat. So I don't know if anybody is going to be prohibitively popular at the running back position. So I don't think I have to get too weird, but Sanders definitely is someone I will play in game stacks.
Yeah, my one concern is that they did say they wanted to ease him in, but that was last week before he missed a game. So he's another week removed from the injury and got in a full practice on Wednesday. I think that, like you said, game stacks, he's definitely in play. I think he has a little bit of viability beyond that, but the problem is he's in a good range. Kenyon Drake is legit at $6,600. Raheem Mostert's $65. Austin Eckler, I think, is intriguing at $6,900. Yeah. I'm not a huge fan, but he's intriguing for sure. Melvin Gordon may not have Phillip Lindsay. It's a really tough matchup, but he's $6,700. So it's a tough range. And as much as I need to talk about the other mid-range guys, I think that Sanders is worthy of consideration despite that really good range too. The Steelers were missing James Conner, Deontay Johnson, and Juju Smith-Schuster from practice Wednesday. Seems like maintenance for Juju and Johnson, but Conner is a legit question mark with an ankle injury. So If Connor sits, Benny Snell is $4,600. Brandon, can you do it?
I can. Do I have to? I don't think so. And I mean, there are so many running back plays. I don't think I need another one. I think I need to start looking at guys and saying no. And I think for that reason, Snell probably just not really in a game environment I care to be involved in.
It's game environment. He ran 7 total routes on Monday, despite Connor missing the entire second half. I know that Snell ran like 14 times in the second half alone, but Jalen Samuels is still mixing in. Anthony McFarland might be able to go this week. So there are, and like we talked about this a lot last year, but if you're not going to get targets, you need to have like 120 yards and 2 touchdowns to kill me for not using you. Yeah. And I'm not sure Benny Snell's going to do that.
Yeah, that's the issue with spending down at running back. Guys who don't have a 3-down role, they really have to cash in on touchdowns and really rack up rushing yardage, which is pretty rare for someone to have a rushing only smash game.
Yep, exactly. Unless you're Derrick Henry. The 49ers injuries at pass catcher are still an issue. Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle missed practice on Wednesday. Head coach Kyle Shanahan said Ayuk may be able to make his debut, but he also said that Kittle might not practice at all this week. He could still play if he doesn't practice, allegedly, but that's not a great feeling. So it's a cushy matchup here at the Jets. But how are you feeling about the 49ers offense this week?
Not super intrigued. I think the thing to keep in mind is if there are pass catchers out, it doesn't necessarily make any pass catcher a number one. They can spread things around, and you still need, I don't want to say talent, but none of these guys make me feel scared not to play, especially if Ayuk isn't fully healthy. So
I used Dante Pettis in the 4 p.m. only slate last week, and I had regrets. So yes,
yeah,
I think that health matters a lot, and I am generally wary of offenses that have a lot of health concerns. 49ers right now have a lot of health concerns, so I'm okay being lower on them. What were you saying?
What about Mostert?
It does lower me on Mostert too.
Okay.
We're going to talk about the mid-range running backs, but it does lower me on him. Especially with Tevin expected to work more this week.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. I think I'm not chasing the Raheem Mostert game.
Yep, I am probably gonna have exposure, but if I don't wind up with any, it might not bother me too much. Le'Veon Bell is on injured reserve with a hamstring injury. The Jets have Frank Gore, who will start alongside Josh Adams. I'm assuming they'll call back up from the practice squad with Kalen Ballage. Brandon, we didn't use Le'Veon Bell. We weren't enthused to use Le'Veon Bell last week when he was what we thought would be the Lone Ranger. Can we safely avoid this entire backfield, please?
Yeah, this is in season long, if you have to play Frank Gore or something, sure. But on FanDuel, when you have the ability to play Christian McCaffrey in your lineup or any number of other running backs, you just don't really have to do it.
Agreed. Philip Lindsay was practiced Wednesday with turf toe. Sounds like he's on the wrong side of questionable, but Cortland Sutton got in a limited practice. KJ Hamler was full, so this offense is getting healthier. Tough matchup, but Brandon, let's assume that Lindsay sits. Are you going at Melvin Gordon or any of the other Broncos here?
This is one of those games I haven't really looked at a lot because I don't feel like I have to. It's a little intriguing, but I would be most interested probably in Gordon without Philip Lindsay, just for the sake of differentiation without getting strange. 63% of the snaps last week, 55% of the routes for Melvin Gordon. So he could step into a pretty strong workload, but I don't really think I'm going to be in on the Broncos game this week. What about you?
I'm really interested in their offense overall this year, and I think that what that means to me is that I want to see what they do on Sunday, but I'm okay missing out if they blow up because I agree. It's a really, really difficult spot. If the Broncos... if they're just okay on Sunday, I'm going to go hard at them in the future. But I think I'm okay letting it bite me if I'm not fully in on them against the Steelers. I think that they could do really well this year, but I'm okay not being ahead of the curve here.
And again, I'm fully okay saying, you know what, this is the Broncos week, but with an implied team total of 17 points in Pittsburgh, 7.5 point underdogs, the odds that they are the offense you had to have with all these other games is just super low.
I will say that among the bad games or the ones with the lower totals, this is probably the one that intrigues me the most. I think so. It's Buffalo, Miami, Denver, Pittsburgh, Jacksonville, Tennessee, Giants and Bears. Actually, we'll talk about that one later. And 49ers, Jets. I think like some of the Pittsburgh guys may be in play as like one-offs. I'm not inclined to stack it, but I think that there are some like one-off plays in this game.
It would be really fun to have a slate with just these games.
Yes.
And fun. By fun, I mean not.
I mean, it'd be 100% Josh Allen and then just like nothing else matters. Let's move into our trends discussion here for week number 2. Brandon, you are starting things off here. We're talking about pretty broad trends, I think, for the most part, trying to look at workloads, pace, depth of target. One of them you're looking at is pass rates because we're looking for things that we can control and may stabilize more quickly. Pass rates are things that coaches consciously do. Therefore, I would assume it stabilizes more quickly. You're looking at pass rates from week 1. I am excited for this trend. What did you see on the field?
Yeah, especially one-score pass rates or however you want to look at things. It's important not to look at just overall pass rates because if teams get behind and they throw a lot, that's not really indicative of what they want to do. So, I want to make sure that I'm reacting accordingly to updated information. And one really important stat for me is pass rates. Again, when the game is close, within 7 points either way, pass rates alone aren't enough for me to go after quarterbacks because it's efficiency, not volume that matters. But they really help me figure out where I want to look for my pass catchers and just know which offenses actively want to throw the ball. So I'm not taking week 1 small sample rates as gospel, but I dug back a few years and they've actually been pretty predictive for a team's full season rate. The correlation about 0.4. So it's definitely not just completely random by any means with, looking at week 1 situation neutral or like one-score pass rates and their full season rates. The most pass-heavy teams within 7 points on just first and second down, which again I think is probably a really good indicator of what a team wants to do. And that might sound like not a lot of plays, but there was about an average of 36 plays per team fitting that. Philly was number 1 at 70%. Houston was next, followed by Atlanta, Seattle, which is a big one for sure. Indianapolis, which is a big deviation from them for last year. Buffalo, same thing. And then Dallas, which Dak with those 3 receivers and Zeke is really interesting to me. Lowest, no surprise, Minnesota and Baltimore, which always is going to, if that sticks with Baltimore wanting to do what they can do, I'm going to be wary about stacking Lamar with his pass catchers. New England, 3rd lowest, Tampa Bay, 4th lowest, which could be, I don't know. I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that one. The Chargers, the Rams, and then Jacksonville. So those were the most sort of run-heavy teams. Whenever a team wasn't necessarily out of a game, still kind of calling the plays that they wanted to call. The biggest movers from last year's rates, which again, this is probably a little bit too random, but the Colts were a big one in terms of they were run heavy. Now they're more pass heavy. Houston, Philadelphia, Seattle, again, not on the main slate, but we're going to probably talk about them a lot this year in terms of their pass rate. Track that closely. Atlanta and then Buffalo. If Josh Allen slings it, I know he can get pretty careless, but that's still fun because it's Josh Allen and he can just sling it. So a few things stand out there for me. The Colts, Seahawks again, Bills. None of those teams are really fully on my radar aside from Jonathan Taylor with the Colts this week. But again, some of the more like run heavy teams in neutral situations, including the Patriots and the Buccaneers, is something I really want to watch. But, I don't want to be dumb here and like overreact to things that don't make sense. But do these numbers worry you about specifically, I guess, the Buccaneers, the 2 LA teams, and kind of how long in general do you need to see situation neutral pass rates before you start buying in each year?
So for the Rams, they kind of did this down the stretch last year too. It was like from week 11 on. It was the sample I tend to look at with them was week 12 on because that's after Robert Woods came back. He missed a game with some personal thing and it never actually was reported what it was. But like he came back from week 12 on and they were a little bit more rush heavy then. So I wouldn't be shocked if they're more rush heavy this year, but I wouldn't expect it to be that much. The Chargers, I think, want to do this. So I think that it's pretty valid there. That's a concern if you're trying to stack that game from the Chiefs' perspective, because it could lower pace. And the Chargers are always a pretty slow team to begin with. So I think that's a concern there. For Tampa Bay, Bruce Arians is not a run-heavy guy. Like, if you think about him, he's not someone who I associate with running the football ever. So I don't know if this is like dumb, but I'm willing to overlook that for them. The thing that I think the team that is actually potentially most noteworthy there is Indianapolis, because when Andrew Luck was healthy in 2018, like from week 5 on, they threw a poop ton. Like, they threw all the time, and it was awesome. We used them for DFS. As a result of that, last year, Luck retires, Jacoby Brissett comes in, and suddenly they become more run-heavy. But now it kind of seems like Frank Reich allows his faith in his quarterback to dictate his pass rate. And week 1, to me, says that he has faith in Phillip Rivers. They're going back home. In 2018 with Luck, they were more pass-happy at home than they were on the road. They actually did that in the early part of the season last year, too, with Brissett. So I kind of think that Indy is really intriguing. It's not just that, like it's not saying you have to use the passing game as a result of that, but it benefits Jonathan Taylor, because I want targets, and Jonathan Taylor got a lot of targets last week. So I think that benefits him, but also it increases my interest in buying low on T.Y. Hilton or using Paris Campbell as a lower salary guy. So I actually think of those teams you discussed, the one that stands out most to me is the Colts. Campbell is $5,300. Hilton is $6,300. I think both those guys are pretty interesting. Are you interested in the Colts passing game?
Yeah, I know Phillip Rivers is it's Phillip Rivers of old with some of the decisions and some of the picks, but and I was kind of in on the Chargers a lot last year, because despite Phillip Rivers throwing those back-breaking interceptions and just making really dumb plays, analytically he was like still fine. And I think there's a big difference between like an average quarterback who can really hone in on I've said hone in a lot already, but he will look to T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell a lot. And if we know that they're going to throw, we know that they're going to throw to certain players, and it's coming from like an league average quarterback. That's not anything we should just write off.
Also indoors against a really young, really, at least based on week 1, bad secondary. Yeah.
So I think I just feel historically high on Phillip Rivers compared to a lot of other people, but I think that if this continues, they're going to be kind of a low-key fun offense, not with a whole lot of eruption games, but you never know.
Is it enough where you would consider using Rivers himself? I think he's $7,100.
I don't think so. I think there are better options. Carson Wentz is 73, and if I'm kind of looking for an off-the-radar quarterback, I don't even know if he's off the radar. I haven't really been on sentiment, but Matthew Stafford is interesting to me as well.
I think he'll be off the radar. Yeah. But I agree that Wentz golf is 73. Maybe that's just me, but I wouldn't be more in on those two guys than Rivers, but I will be in on his pass catchers, which does include Jonathan Taylor. Speaking of which, let's move into my first trend and talk about the workloads for mid-range running backs, because given the injuries and some surprise roles, there are a bunch of middle-tier guys who are in play for this week. We just have to decide how we're going to rank them, and their workloads should be deciding factors here. The guys I'm going to include in this are the players at $6,500 on down, so not including Kenyon Drake, Austin Eckler, guys like that, Melvin Gordon, but from $6,500 on down. The guy in that range who got the most adjusted opportunities in week number 1 was Malcolm Brown. Once again, adjusted opportunities is carries plus 2x targets, because targets are worth twice as much as a carry on FanDuel. Brown had 26 adjusted opportunities, and he got goal line work. The Eagles just lost Vinny Curry in the opener, which makes the matchup a bit better, and it's also a game that I want to stack. So I actually feel pretty good about Malcolm Brown at $5,200, which I didn't expect to say coming into the year. Raheem Mostert was second in that range in adjusted opportunities. He got 5 targets in that game. That's not the norm for him. Brandon Ayuk was out. Tevin Coleman is limited because of his sickle cell trait. I am more skeptical that Mostert duplicates this. So he's in play at $6,500, but I'm not fully in. Ronald Jones got 17 carries from 3 targets. That is 23 adjusted opportunities, and it came in a game where they were in a negative game script. He has an amazing matchup this week, and they're big favorites. But his snap rate was low. Leonard Fournette is there, so we'll probably talk about Ronald Jones in a second. Jonathan Taylor got 21 adjusted opportunities, and that was less than Nyheim Hines. However, in the second half, when Marlon Mack was out, it did skew towards Taylor. He had 20 snaps. Both guys had 20 snaps, 8 carries for Taylor, along with 5 targets. Hines had 2 carries and 4 targets, so Taylor had 18 adjusted opportunities in the second half alone. That's really fun. So I think that right now, I'm going to rank these guys Taylor 1 at the top of this group. He is the guy with the biggest upside in this bunch. That's valuable. Should get passing game work. He can score long touchdowns because he's hashtag good at football. So I'm going to put Jonathan Taylor number 1. Outside of that, I think I might go Malcolm Brown second. He's $5,200 facing the Eagles, a game I want to stack. He'll get some targets. He saves me more salary than Jones and Mostert do, so I kind of don't hate it. I'll put Jones third. The matchup is elite, and like Mostert's an elite matchup too, but I don't know. Those guys, I am less sold on their roles continuing, whereas I think might be more sticky, specifically for Taylor and then potentially for Brown as well. Benny Snell could, again, creep into this discussion at $4,600, but again, just 7 routes in week number 1. So hopefully this shows where I'm at in this group, again, with Taylor 1, potentially Brown 2, Ronald Jones 3, and Raheem Mostert 4. Brandon, am I off on these guys? How are you feeling about them specifically for week 2?
So I think Taylor has to be the number 1. Mm-hmm. I know we cautioned last week not to chase value at running back necessarily, but Jonathan Taylor could see a huge surge in his snap rate. He also could not. So I'm not 100% sold, but I do think he's cash game viable because I think that he has the best shot to lead this group in snaps. So who was it? Taylor, Jones, Brown, and Mostert?
Yes.
I would go with that's tough because the thing with I think Mostert has to be last because Kenyon Drake is available for an extra $100 on FanDuel. So I can't really separate that out. And I like Kenyon Drake a lot. So I'm going to put Mostert 4th.
Okay.
But as for Brown and Jones,
it's a tough decision, right?
It is because if you give me what Ronald Jones had in week 1, I would feel pretty good about it. But something is lurking that Leonard Fournette will get more involved. But I'm a little more worried about Leonard Fournette getting more involved than like Darrell Henderson
or Cam Akers.
Yes, Cam Akers is definitely a concern, but
I agree that I'd be more concerned about Leonard Fournette than Cam Akers right now. I agree with you.
Yeah, like for week 2. So I think I might put Brown second as well.
Okay, cool. And just to clarify, we are not in on Brown in cash games. At least I'm not, and you're not either, correct?
No, I think you can make the case for, and I don't know if I'm doing this, but you can definitely make the case for Jonathan Taylor in a cash game. I think I think he's the only one of the 4 I would consider rostering in a cash game.
I agree. Like we're talking about workloads from last week, but if I'm projecting workloads for this week, I would say Jonathan Taylor's projected adjusted opportunities would be higher than other people. So I think that's the way I'm viewing it. So Jonathan Taylor in play for cash. Malcolm Brown, I think a pretty fun tournament option who I wouldn't expect to carry almost any popularity. And then Jones, I think, will be more popular than he should be just because of the matchup. I would bet that he winds up being decently popular. And Mostert, people love using people against the Jets, which they should. But I think that
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good.
I think Mostert's role in week 1 is going to scale back a little bit with Tevin Coleman able to play.
I agree.
More.
I agree. So I am okay being underweight on those 2 guys. Let's move into your second trend. Talking about league-wide deep attempt rates in week 1. We kind of talked about this on Monday where like there were a lot of guys who didn't throw it deep, so their deep rates were very low. You're looking into historical trends and trying to find out what that should mean for us for week number 2. What did you see when you dug into the data?
Yes. So week 1, deep balls weren't non-existent, but the league-wide downfield attempt rate was a little bit down, 17.2%. In 2019, 17.4%. But historically, week 1 is the sort of lowest week in terms of downfield attempt rate over the past 4 seasons. Perhaps a bigger issue was overall target depth on average. Week 1 in 2019, the average pass traveled 8.23 yards. Compared to 7.65 this year, which is a difference of almost 0.6 yards per attempt, which definitely adds up over 1,000 attempts on a season. So it's definitely not insignificant. It's about 93% of what it was last year in the opener. That said, again, week 1 over the past 4 seasons has historically had the lowest average target depth of any week on average. So I don't want to overreact and say some of these guys aren't going to throw it deep. It seems to be something that's indicative of week 1, and especially with the lack of reps, that could play into it as well. But specifically with this past week, it was the 5th lowest single week ADOT since the start of 2016 from weeks 1 through 16. So comparing it to 64 other weeks, it was the 5th lowest. In the 4 weeks with lower ADOTs than what we saw last week in week 1, the average weekly increase to the next week was 0.96 yards. So it climbed almost a full yard. 2 of them climbed by almost 1.2 yards. And after week 1 of 2016, so another really low ADOT week 1, we saw the largest week-to-week shift in this sample. And that was actually the week 2 was the highest single week ADOT in the sample. So what I'm trying to leverage here is the possibility that deep attempts climb a lot. And I want to react to guys who didn't really throw deep a lot last week and say that's not going to stick, specifically someone who jumps out as Kyler Murray. He was really low in ADOT, Jared Goff as well. So I'm not going to assume that the short and medium ADOT receivers magically get tons of deep passes, but the guys who got downfield work last week could get more this week. Guys who historically get downfield work and maybe didn't last week, they should see a boost. Week 2 is usually the best week for early overcorrections once we have some data. And I think that with the value backs that we just talked about, a really easy way to pivot from the sort of consensus or really tempting build where you say, maybe I do play Raheem Mostert or Ronald Jones so that I can get up for Devontae Adams. I can't really fault that, but I think what could happen is spending up for the stud backs where we know they're going to play snaps and then chasing guys who can just break huge plays like Amari Cooper, Deshaun Jackson, Christian Kirk, AJ Green, Keenan Allen actually had really good usage in week 1, and DJ Moore. Those are the guys who underperformed their expectation based on air yards and targets in week 1. So I know it's a little bit all over, but what I want to attack is saying quarterbacks who threw deep infrequently in week 1 are going to climb, specifically again like Kyler Murray, Jared Goff, some of the guys who were the lowest in ADOT. Someone like Gardner Minshew, we know his ADOT's going to be low based on what we've seen. Patrick Mahomes as well, very few deep shots. So I don't want to it's not that anybody's forgetting that Tyreek Hill can get deep targets, but we didn't really see it last week. And I think that there could be a big explosion for week 2. So I'm trying to buy in on wide receivers who get a lot of deep work in hopes that they cash in.
So all in on Deshaun Jackson.
Yes. League leader in air yards in week 1. Jalen Reagor had an even higher ADOT than Deshaun.
I think his first target was like 60-something yards downfield. And he caught it. He was awesome.
55-yard catch, I think it was. But yeah, I mean, so what I want to look at is not just the targets, because I think that everyone has the target data available, but I know there are sources out there with ADOT that you can find, even on Next Gen Stats, shows you average target depth. I want to play the variance game in tournaments and really go for these home run receivers in week 2.
I agree. I think that you mentioned, so you were going through a list of guys you were going to target, and it was Amari Cooper, Deshaun Jackson. I was like, wait a minute, is he looking at my single entry lineup right now? I was like, got super paranoid, like, am I screen sharing and not knowing it? But I think that Cooper I think that entire Cowboys passing offense is elite this week. But Deshaun Jackson, burned a lot of people last week at high popularity. We talked about a lot of ways to pivot off of him on the podcast here. Hopefully you did that. But I think that Jackson this week will see some coverage from Jalen Ramsey. But he also was in the slot, I think, 27% of the time in week number 1, whereas Rager was not. I don't know if Ramsey will actually shadow this week. I kind of would expect him not to, just because they move guys around enough. But I would say Deshaun Jackson is kind of the first guy who stands out there. They said his snaps will go up in week number 2. He got 7 overall targets. 6 of those were 15 yards downfield or 16 yards downfield. I think it's a great spot to get in on Deshaun Jackson, but also the other guys you mentioned are good too. Kirk, I'm a little bit more worried about just because the DeAndre Hopkins thing was so wild. I was not expecting DeAndre Hopkins, and he's not going to have a 40% target share, but I wasn't expecting him to have 30%. So I was expecting Kirk to be good. I had Kirk and again, the 4 p.m. only slate didn't work out. I'm a little bit more hesitant on him, but most of the other guys, I can definitely get in on.
Yeah, I mean, with Kirk specifically, he's a perfect example. 5 targets, 1 catch, 3 downfield targets, though. So a lot of empty usage, basically. And I'm just trying to look for those home run hitters who didn't really pay off, because I think a very tempting lineup build this week is going to be Jonathan Taylor, possibly another value back, and then spending up for the guys who really came through, like Julio, Devontae, which makes sense. And I think
good plays again. Yeah.
I think it's viable for sure.
Yeah.
But for these big entry tournaments, I want to consider saying, hey, you know what, maybe Jonathan Taylor is still kind of in a timeshare with Nyheim Hines. Maybe Ronald Jones doesn't really add to his snap rate, and Leonard Fournette is a little bit more involved. And instead really target these, T.Y. Hilton, high ADOT guy. He can get downfield work. He can break plays, and we didn't really see it in week 1. So I want to target the forgotten home run hitter wide receivers a lot in tournaments.
Going back to something we discussed previously, you want to target high variance wide receivers when they're at home in tight matchups. Michael Gallup at home, tight matchup in a dome. Get behind that. Yeah. Christian Kirk at home, not as tight of a matchup, but he is at home. That definitely does work. Deshaun Jackson at home, tight matchup, high ADOT, checks every box. And Jalen Reagor actually the exact same thing. He had 4 targets in week 1, but all 4 were downfield. So I would say those 3 guys specifically would be the ones who stand out. Paris Campbell, I guess I don't know about his deep work in week 1. I know he got a lot of overall targets, but I think all of those guys are going to be people who fit the flow chart for me for mid-range wide receivers. 3 deep targets to Paris Campbell. So he fits it too.
Yeah. Yep.
Were you looking it up?
Yeah. I mean, I have it all. I've been bragging about my pivot tables. Finally figured those out. So,
Paris Campbell, at Ohio State, I'm not sure he was allowed to run a route more than 10 yards downfield, but he got 3 deep targets in week 1. So he fits that flow chart. So Paris Campbell, Deshaun Jackson, Jalen Reagor, Michael Gallup, giddy up. My second trend is talking about pace, because you were talking about pass to run ratio, and that actually has some overlap with pace. And I think that these are 2 things that can stabilize quickly and we can react to. And it's not just pass to run ratio that influences pace. We can have teams running no huddle, teams just trying to snap the ball quickly. This is a good time to see each team with their current coaching staff and current personnel, which means we can look at some pace data. Football Outsiders tracks each team's pace in neutral situations, meaning it accounts for things like game flow. I like to target high-paced games for stacking. We've got several good ones on the main slate. The biggest one is actually in Arizona for the Cardinals against Washington. We know the Cardinals were going to be fast. We kind of knew that going into the year. They're 5th after week 1, but Washington is actually 4th. And if you look at Scott Turner, their OC, what he did in the past, he was fast in Carolina last year too. So I think that's sticky. I think it was predictable coming into the year. And I think that game stacks really well, despite I wanted to go into the year being high on Washington's defense. I still want to do that because week 1 was awesome. It's going to be really hard not to stack this game, though, despite the fact that I do respect the poo out of their defense. Another one here is the Cowboys versus the Falcons. The Cowboys are actually 1st in a situation-neutral pace. They were 2nd last year. The Falcons are 11th. And that one's very easy to stack up on both sides. It's very expensive, but you can definitely do it. It's logic. There are logical routes on both sides. I want to stack that one. The third one, where both teams are inside the top 15, is the Rams versus the Eagles. This is going to wind up being one of my favorite game stacks on the main slate. It lets you buy low on the Eagles with Lane Johnson back and playing, and it's a super tight spread. That is exactly what you want for game stacking, and I don't think people will be as high in this one. The total just came down a point yesterday, so I don't think people are as high in this game as I am, so I'm going to load up on it. The final one here is actually the Giants versus the Bears. The Giants ran the most no huddle in the league in week 1, according to Pat Thorman of Established the Run, so that could be interesting. I just don't have as much faith in the respective offenses. So if I'm ranking these games for stacking, it's Cowboys, Falcons 1, Rams, Eagles 2, Cardinals, Washington 3, Bears, Giants 4, and kind of an afterthought, but I will get some mini stacks there. Like, I guess I don't even know the way, like Allen Robinson with Darius Slayton or something. I don't know. But I'm going to try to load up on exposure to these games, especially the first 3. So how are you ranking these games, Brandon, from a stacking perspective?
These 4 specifically?
Actually, just let's open up the floor. I'm doing this based on pace, but there are other reasons to stack games. So overall, favorite game to stack?
Cowboys Falcons, which is the obvious one. I made this list and then I forgot what I had ranked. So Cowboys Falcons 1, Arizona Washington 2.
Okay.
And then 3 might be still Baltimore Houston.
Okay.
Because it's the easiest game to it's super easy to stack because
you don't have a lot of options. Like you know where you're going.
Yeah, it's going to be Will Fuller, David Johnson, Deshaun on Houston's side, potentially Brandon Cooks depending on his health.
I did not mention Will Fuller in the previous checklist, but he is at home, high A guy. So yes, I should have. I know the Baltimore corners are elite, but like usage matters too. So yeah I agree.
And then with Baltimore, we know it's Lamar, Marquise Brown, and Mark Andrews. Yeah.
I'm not as high on that game as
I understand why,
Yeah. But it's indoors. I definitely like that. I just think the pace might be a bit too slow, but we'll talk about the game here in just 1 second. But I do think that, like, if you've been resistant to using the method that we do when it comes to multi-entry, where you build a game stack and then let everything else, like I do it the way I call it skeleton lineups, where I fill it out with Dak Prescott, Zeke Elliott, Calvin Ridley, and then I'll fill in the rest of the lineup. Dak Prescott, Zeke Elliott, Julio Jones, fill in the rest of the lineup. Dak Prescott, Zeke Elliott, Hayden Hurst, fill out the rest of the lineup. So I think this is a good week to do that. Good week to multi-enter. It should be a pretty fun slate for sure. FanDuel is always giving users a chance at glory and a big payday, and the Ringers Mega Contest is the latest way they are giving you more ways to win. It is easy. Just make 5 picks against the spread, including 1 double down every week. The top 100 users at the end of the season will compete for $25,000 in prizes during the playoffs. The best part, it is free to enter. Week 1 is already in the books, so what are you waiting for? To enter for free, visit playfree.fanduel.com/theringer. That's playfree.fanduel.com/theringer. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's take a look at what bookmakers are saying here for week number 2. And not shockingly, the Ravens have the highest implied total on the main slate. It is up at 29.5. The 7-point favorites here over the Texans. The total in this game has gone up by a point. So where do the Ravens sit for you, Brandon? Are you running it back with any Texans, knowing the Ravens defense is legit, or how are you viewing this one?
Yeah, like I said, I like this game. It's not my favorite because there's a path to it being I won't say completely shy of the over-under, but a little more run-heavy, a little slower. But I think it is just, again, a really easy game to stack because if it does blow up, it's going to be through Lamar Jackson or potentially Deshaun Watson, although I don't really like the matchup there. And, again, we know Lamar throws it to 2 guys and then everybody else, Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews. And then I was really encouraged with what I saw from David Johnson in week 1, but you also have to be incredibly encouraged by what you saw with Will Fuller. So it's a really easy game to stack, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But if this game erupts and it's not through basically those 3 pass catchers on either side, I think it's not going to benefit anybody anyway. So I think it's okay just to stack up those three and hope for the best.
I would agree with you on David Johnson because, yes, the workload is good, but I can get equally good workloads from other guys who are cheaper and not facing the Ravens.
Yeah.
So I agree. Will Fuller is the one Texan I'm okay using. And like, I think because I'm not as high in the Texans, it's harder to be high in the Ravens. So I might wind up being less in on them than I am than others may be, which is always scary. And like, it stinks. I love watching, like, it's so, I don't have concerns when I have Lamar Jackson in the lineup. Like when I was using Derek Carr last week, I was like, this makes me really anxious.
Yep.
With Lamar Jackson, I don't feel that way. But like, I might just be lower this week because of.
Yeah, they're just one of the basically two teams where I'm less worried about matchup because they can put up like 48 on anybody.
Right.
So,
like, in some ways it's better because maybe the game will stay closer and like they'll be trying in the fourth quarter for once. The highest game total on the slate is the Cowboys versus the Falcons, one we discussed a bit earlier, but total there is 53. The spread is 4.5 points, which is decently tight, but also kind of shocking. I would have expected the Cowboys to be more heavily favored than that, but whatever. The total here opened at 50. There's been obviously money on the over. How are you looking to stack this game up?
Every way, pretty much. Both quarterbacks are in play. Both running backs are in play, although with Todd Gurley, really hated the usage.
I think he has David Johnson syndrome where it's fine, but I'd rather spend a bit less and use someone else.
In a game stack, I will use Todd Gurley. That's what I said with him last week. That's how I'm treating him again this week. And then, oh boy, with the pass catchers, there's Cooper, Lamb, and Gallup in play, potentially punting with Dalton Schultz. And then same thing for the Falcons, Julio, Ridley, Russell Gage, Hurst. Just depends on your favorite way to do it.
I agree. If I have one game stack, I'm going to ask you the same thing, so prepare ahead. If I have one game stack, I am going Dak, Zeke, Dalton Schultz at $4,000. He ran, I think, 27 routes in week number 1. He got some targets. I think it was 4 targets. He didn't do well on those targets. Maybe he won't get those targets this time. But I would say, oh, no. Stupid, dumb. Dak, Zeke, Gallup, Hurst. That's my final answer.
That would be pretty similar to what my first thought would be. Okay. But I would be fine going with Dak, Zeke, Gallup. I think Gallup's the best tournament play in that of the Dallas pass catchers. But I think I would have to play either Julio or Ridley in that. And I would probably lean Ridley just for the salary, being realistic.
So the reason that I went with Hurst is because I've had troubles building game stacks here. Because when I go Dak, like I tried it with Dak, basically my mindset was I have 4 running backs I want to use. What if I use Dak to get my Cowboys exposure instead of Zeke? And I omitted Zeke. So it was like Dak, CEH, Taylor, and Derrick Henry. That was tough. So as a result of that, I might need to dip down to save some salary on Gallup. And Ridley's over $7,000 this week. So I think that's why I gravitated towards Hurst. But like Calvin Ridley is like a really good option despite the fact that his salary went up. Like he deserved that bump. So
well, there's nothing stopping me from Dak, Zeke, Gallup, Ridley, and Hurst.
True. That's very fair.
Schultz,
with how often the Falcons throw, sure, absolutely.
Yeah. It's like I think it's one of those where I would consider, and I don't usually do this. My game stacks are usually quarterback and then 3 others.
Yeah.
But I think 4 others is definitely in play here.
It's not out of play. I agree. Where does Dak rank among quarterbacks for you?
In terms of actual rankings, it's tough because I'm pretty sure he's your player pick number 1. So I didn't really think of how to rank him, but he might be my number 1.
I agree. He's very good. The Chiefs are back on the main slate. Awesome. They've got the 4th highest total on the slate. It's at 28. They are 8.5-point favorites. They do get to play indoors against the Chargers, who don't have Derwin James. So we're in on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. What about the rest of the Chiefs here?
I don't think this is a spot where there's never going to be a week where the Chiefs are off the radar. But they played Thursday. They're a little bit more out of our minds. And again, Patrick Mahomes didn't throw it deep in week one, hardly at all. So I think this is a week where I want to go hard at Tyreek Hill for tournaments. I think that I'm okay chasing Sammy Watkins just from the usage, but I know better than to trust it. So I like the Chiefs a lot, really, with those. I mean, it's a very easy team to stack because we know where the ball's going, but I would almost guarantee that I'm higher on the Chargers on the other side of things than a lot of people are.
Okay, talk to me about that.
So I talked about this on their recap podcast on Monday morning, but their target tree was like a very, very narrow. And it was Hunter Henry, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen getting 8+ targets, and nobody else had more than 2. If you put that in a game where they're going to have to throw, which again, I know passing efficiency doesn't come from volume, but for pass catchers, volume matters, even if the touchdown expectation is a little bit lower. So I think that between those 3 pass catchers and then Austin Eckler, who, again, the new expectation for me with Austin Eckler is not 1 target and not being really involved. Pretty sure off the top of my head, he ran a good number of routes, just didn't get a lot of looks. I would imagine that gets corrected for better or for worse. So I think that there are multiple ways to stack this game up in terms of bringbacks. And just from a sheer talent perspective, Mike Williams is good enough to make some plays. Keenan Allen, we know, is good enough. Hunter Henry had downfield work. So I think this game could stick a little closer for longer. I know the biggest concern is that the Chargers just try to take the air out of the ball, but I don't think they're going to be able to do that against the Chiefs.
Mike Williams is $5,800. I could get behind that. I find that kind of interesting.
Yeah, and again, he's someone. It's like you're not trying to consider like, do I play Mike Williams in a single lineup? It's like no. If you're stacking this game,
yeah.
If you're stacking this game, it has to be close for it to be worthwhile, and Mike Williams is going to be involved in that.
And I would say if I have a single entry tournament lineup, this is not one of the games I'll stack. I've already decided that CEH will be in that lineup. If I have a single entry lineup, just 1 bullet, he will be in that lineup. But I don't feel the need to run it back with a Charger. But Mike Williams would be my number 1 guy.
Or downfield target.
Yeah. And like we know he can haul those in too. He won't score a touchdown because that's like illegal for Mike Williams. But he could pay off based on yardage, and that's fun. With Eckler, I've been thinking about this, and I agree with you that his baseline expectation going forward is not 1 target. My concern is if it's 4 targets and he's not getting goal line work, then the path to him being really good is a bit more muddied. So let's assume Miles Sanders continues to practice in full for the rest of this week. Who you got, Miles Sanders or Austin
Eckler? In terms of floor expectation?
FanDuel points. Bet. If you say Eckler, I'll make a bet with you on this one.
No, I think I'd go Sanders still.
Okay.
Because the floor for Eckler the floor for Sanders could be low if he's eased back in. We don't know. I need to find out more there, but I would still lean Sanders, especially in like a single lineup situation.
I agree. I have Sanders over Eckler. Where do you have Sanders relative to Drake? I know this is off topic, but
I would imagine lower.
Yeah.
Just because I like Drake. I mean, I was initially a little bit down on Drake in terms of what I saw in week 1 from like a snap reaction, but he was, I think, and I have him as a player pick, so I'll talk about this for sure, but I think he was
I got sidetracked.
I think he was 1 of 8 running backs with like a 70% snap rate.
Okay.
It's just like, it's a good snap rate. So
yeah, I'll take that. And he gets targets. Sweet. Packers Lions doesn't project for a great pace, but total here is at 49.5. It opened at 46.5, but has gone up 3 points since the open. I'd lean the under in this game personally, but the Packers are 6-point favorites, which gives them the 5th highest total on the slate. Devontae Adams is obvious. We both love Devontae. If you had the salary, you should use Devontae Adams. If you're using lower salaried running backs, use them to get Devontae Adams. But do Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, any of the secondary receivers do anything for you here?
Yeah, they kind of all do. Again, I talked about this on Monday's pod, but the arrow is up for me on Aaron Jones. He ran 43% of the routes according to Pro Football Focus, 16 carries, just 54% of the snaps, but I would imagine his snap rate is one of the sort of outlier situations where it's not going to be super high, but he should be involved whenever he is on the field. Still just a game stat guy for me. I don't feel the need to use him in a cash game or single entry format. But Alan Lazard, 86% of the routes, one deep target, one red zone target. His salary is 5,600. I would consider that. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, 3 downfield targets for him in the opener. The problem with the Lions is only 2 guys played at least 65% of snaps. That was Marvin Jones at 91 and Quintez Cephas at 79. TJ Hawkinson was at 64%, but Marv would be in play for me. It's going to depend. I really wish Kenny Golladay was 100%, but I think this game is potentially the sneakiest for the reason you said is you would expect it to go under. Yeah. But I could see a lot of ways that this goes over. And so this is a game I'm going to eye pretty closely tracking into Sunday, because if this is like the lone forgotten high total game, I will definitely have lineups here.
That's fair. I think that's very fair. I think
Adrian Peterson?
No. I was prepared to bribe you not to say his name on the podcast. I was going to give you. I asked you for your Venmo. I was going to give you $5 as a joke and hope you sent it back. But I was going to give you $5 not to ever say his name.
Just to tilt Jim, I was going to make Adrian Peterson an entire trend.
Rundown, an entire trend about Adrian Peterson. You took the time to freaking write out a trend, and I was willing to bribe you not to talk about him, and then you still said his name. I'm so mad at you. Not really, but whatever. I think that I will have mini stacks here. I don't know if I'll use either quarterback, especially if Golladay does not play. I think that Devontae Marvin stacks are really fun. Are you going at Quintez Cephas after a 10-target game last week? Because I will not be. He was hyper inefficient on those targets, and I would not be shocked if his role reduces as a result.
Yeah, I don't think I have to. I think this game is one of those where if you want to stack it, it's going to be Devontae and Marvin. And you said Devontae Marvin, and I was like, who's Devontae Marvin? But
there are 6 Marvins in this game, so I could have been talking Marvin Hall. You never know.
Yeah. So I think it's one of those where it's Devontae, Marvin, possibly Aaron Jones. Not a whole lot else. I think DeAndre Swift will probably just separate eventually. Feel really bad for him still.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a really easy game to stack if you want to stack it. It's not one of those where you have to hit one of the right, like Falcons Cowboys. You can stack that game a lot of ways and still not really hit it the right way. I don't think it's going to be that way for this game.
I did mention on Monday that Danny Amendola had a lot of air yards. So he's $5,200. I'm not doing it because he is the bane of my existence. Just saying that's a thing. The checklist for a wide receiver in a tournament is they need to be able to get 85 yards or 2 touchdowns. I'm not sure he can do either. He got 81 yards last week, but I think that's his max. That's my rule of thumb for wide receiver. I know I've told this story before, but that's my rule of thumb for wide receivers in tournaments. There was one wide receiver last year who made a perfect lineup without checking both or one of those boxes, and it was Danny freaking Amendola. So he can go away. Weather for this week. There are a couple of games with wind speeds around 10 miles per hour, but not. It's Thursday morning. We don't need to overreact yet. I will say that I would check back on the wind speeds for Bucks Panthers, Packers Lions. I would check back on the wind speeds for Bears Giants, and also Rams Eagles. As of right now, I'm not going to lower my thoughts on those games too much. But if we were to get to Sunday morning and it was still 10 to 15 miles per hour, I guess there's a big difference between 15 and 10 miles per hour. But if it's still there, lower them a bit, but nothing of major note for this week. So let's dive into our player picks for week number 2 on FanDuel. Brandon, who are you targeting at quarterback this week?
I'm going to go with Kyler Murray as my number 1. He has a salary of $8,000 on FanDuel. He had 91 rushing yards before taking a bunch of kneel downs from the shotgun formation.
He was over 100 before that.
Yeah.
So hopefully you didn't have like some crazy prop on that.
But yeah, 91 rushing yards and a touchdown. And apparently, I thought this might be a little bit tricky with Murray for 2020, but the stacking candidate, because I was like, maybe it'll be DeAndre Hopkins weeks, maybe it'll be Christian Kirk weeks. Based on week one, it might always be DeAndre Hopkins week, just because of how he got fed. And the matchup with Washington is really not anything that I'm worried about. Their defensive analytics look good against Carson Wentz last week, but I mean, he still racked up some fantasy points. And really interestingly, Wentz was the guy who slung it deep the most in week one. Kyler Murray didn't. He had a 4.8 yard average target depth, just 4 downfield attempts against the 49ers, who, if I recall correctly, kind of limited his downfield work last year as well. So this could be one of those spots where Murray just opens it up, slings it, which puts me on stacks with DeAndre Hopkins. And again, I'm still in on Christian Kirk. Sounds like maybe you're not, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with them. I am worried about the matchup, but I care less about matchup with running quarterbacks. And as you said, Kyler is just embracing that. So despite being worried about the matchup, I agree that Murray is in play.
And my second guy is going to be kind of an off the radar sort of pick, just because I think you don't need me to tell you to play Patrick Mahomes if you can.
What? Who?
But I'm going to go with Matthew Stafford. His salary is $7,200. He's a quarterback in a game with a total. I don't actually know what it is. You probably just told me, but it was
49.5.
So it's still 49.5.
Yeah, it was 46 at open, but it's 49.5 now.
Yeah, would get a huge boost if Galladay is healthy, but he was kind of fine without him. Despite a lot of incompletions, his passing net expected points per dropback number was 0.21. League average last year was 0.11, so about twice as efficient. He had 9 downfield attempts, had just 1 touchdown, but easily should have had a second and more than 300 yards because DeAndre Swift dropped a touchdown. But, I prefer your lower salaried quarterback for sure. But with the value at running back, I think we can probably avoid dipping into the 6,000 range for quarterback this week.
I would agree. My first love at quarterback is Dak Prescott. I think he is the number 1 overall quarterback for this week. Once you consider salary, Dak's a home favorite, playing indoors, projected high-scoring game. He literally checks every box for me at quarterback. The Cowboys are also a team, I don't buy into home road splits for any team because I think they're very stupid. And I agree that we should always downplay them. The Cowboys are weird, and they are the one team where I actually do look at them. Last year, Dak averaged 0.33 passing net expected points per dropback versus 0.18 on the road. This also happened in 2018, so it's not even an 8-game sample. I don't look at 2018 splits before Amari Cooper, but even after Amari Cooper, they laid a dud on the road against Indy. And it is smart always to downplay home road splits. I need to say that. However, when the Cowboys go home, I'm going to bump them up because why not? With the value running back, I can make it work here, and I would very much like to do so. So Dak Prescott, my number 1 quarterback for this week. My number 2 is Carson Wentz, the guy you alluded to. I'm expecting a bounce back this week. They were facing Washington last week, and I think Washington will have the best defensive line in football this year. But now Philadelphia is at home. They get Lane Johnson back. Plus, I'm not expecting the Rams defense to fare as well as they did against the Cowboys. It's kind of a weird game. So I think that the Rams defense will come back to earth a bit. I think that Wentz will spring back to life. Like you said, he will throw it deep. That's a good thing. So I think Wentz is good at 73. I also don't mind Jared Goff in the same game. Between the two, I prefer Wentz because he's at home. I do like that. But I like Goff too. So I think that they're both pretty solid options. Let's move to running back. Who stands out to you here, Brandon? It's a really, really good week to load up on running backs.
Yeah, I might actually just ask you about this, but Christian McCaffrey, 10,500. We haven't really talked about him and what our expectations are here. I think the salary is fine with value elsewhere. There are value tight ends. You can just play Carson Wentz and save a little bit at quarterback. Wide receivers always has wide receiver always has some value picks, but 97% of the snaps ran a route on 97% of the dropbacks in week one. Only 3 running backs cleared 80% of the snaps, or 3 other running backs, I should say. And only 6 more, so 7 total, were above 70%. Again, 97% for McCaffrey. even in this matchup, I think he offers a floor and ceiling that other running backs just kind of don't. I don't want to overthink it too much against the Bucs, who did limit Alvin Kamara on the ground, but not through the air. So I'm going to break here actually and just get some clarity on what you think with McCaffrey.
Yeah, I think that he's like – so like last week, I had Christian McCaffrey in 70% of my tournament lineups. This week, I think he's more of a 20% guy because I would rank him below – once you consider salary, Zeke Elliott, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It's very possible that McCaffrey is next on that list, but I want to get enough of those guys. Like, those are my core running backs for this week, those four specifically. And, like, I don't think that Aaron Jones is out of play. I don't think Miles Sanders is out of play. I think that Kenyon Drake works. I am interested in taking some swings at Melvin Gordon, too, despite the matchup, just because the workload could be so good. So I think because there are so many running backs who are in play this week and so many running backs I think have a path to a really good ceiling, I'm okay. Like, again, 20% is not nothing, but it's also not where I'm usually at with Christian McCaffrey. Does that kind of answer what you're asking?
It does. I think the way that I would put it is I don't think Christian McCaffrey is a must for cash games, which is
weird.
Strange. But it's also a week where I want to be overweight on McCaffrey relative to what I anticipate his draft percentage will be for tournaments, just because I think that with his receiving work, he can just statistically in my models, like the ceiling is still almost untouchable. So I want to make sure that I am embracing for a blow up game from Christian McCaffrey. But
I will say too, for 1 second, the sentiment on Christian McCaffrey on FanShare Sports, only 63% positive. So there you go.
Anytime we can get Christian McCaffrey, someone really the only running back who can play every snap pretty much and get 12 targets and 20 carries or something. Anytime you can get that whenever everyone else is like, I don't have to play him this week, it's worth it for tournament exposure for me. One reason I don't have to play Christian McCaffrey is that we have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, whose salary is $8,000. Mentioned on the Monday pod that we would have paid Edwards-Helaire more than $8,000 to be on our teams. I think you were like 87. I was around 80, 83. But
that was before I knew that. That was before I saw that Zeke was like 86.
Like, but I mean, the instant reaction. So I think he's kind of like one of 5 backs-ish in play for cash games when it's all said and done. 67% of the snaps, 52% of the routes in week 1, 10 red zone carries. I don't care that he got stuffed to the goal line. I know that he did. I know that he had only 2 targets, but he ran a lot of routes. And Kansas City's offense is too good when we have a running back we can trust who will not be scripted out in the off chance that, they start to trail. My third love is still Kenyon Drake, whose salary is $6,600. I was initially disappointed with the week 1, but I mentioned with McCaffrey how few backs actually played 70% of the snaps, and Drake was one of them at 71%. Only 20 adjusted opportunities, which I don't love. I also don't love the rushing matchup, but we're looking for a lot of plays in this game, and Drake can get targets, he can get carries, he can be involved near the goal line. So for the salary, I think he is a really enticing pick this week.
Drake or Miles Sanders?
Drake.
I think Drake's the better one because Sanders may be limited coming off the injury, so I'm not going to bet you on it, but it's very close to me. My first love at running back is Ezekiel Elliott because we don't talk about this much, but we should target running backs in projected close, high-scoring games. In last year's perfect lineups on FanDuel, 62% of the running backs came from games with a spread of less than 5 points, and only 50% of games league-wide fit that criteria. So a pretty big gap, and the spread here is 4.5 points. Zeke had 22 carries and 4 targets while playing 88% of the snaps in week 1. It's a ridiculous workload. I was concerned about passing down work going into the year. I no longer am, given what we saw in week 1 and the reports we heard out of camp. So Zeke is among the top running backs plays on the slate. He's very close to number 1 for me. I also like Derrick Henry, despite the fact I just talked about close games, and I like pass catching. He's just lower salary than he should be. He's $8,300. That is despite leading the league in adjusted opportunities in week number 1. He had 3 targets and ran 22 pass routes, the most he has run in a regular season game his entire career. The routes run number should come down because Darrington Evans got in a full practice Wednesday. They're not going to throw that much again. And I don't expect Evans to have a huge role because he missed a lot of time in camp too, but that could be something. Henry can pay off on his rushing alone, so I'm actually kind of excited to use him for once, which never happens. I want to get your thoughts on Derrick Henry before I do my third love, though. How are you feeling about him? Because I know that we tend to be lower than consensus on him, but I don't think I am for this week.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, his salary is usually like 87 plus or something, it feels like. Yeah. I know it's not after Thanksgiving, so there should be a lot of...
Is he allowed to eat when it's not November?
Not according to Twitter, but okay. Yeah, I think for the salary and in the matchup, Henry is one of the few... Again, of all the good running back plays, I think he's one of the few actual cash game considerations. So I'm with you where I like him a lot. I don't know. I probably lean Zeke, Edwards-Helaire, and possibly Jonathan Taylor for a cash game. But Henry is very much in that consideration set.
Right now, he's number 4. That could change by Sunday. So I will say that. He's number 4, but I want to be overweight in tournaments still. My third love is that other guy you mentioned, Jonathan Taylor. I initially didn't think Taylor would be in play for cash games, but I am quickly warming to it because we know he will get the lion's share of the early down work, and he's going to add targets too. He's at home behind an elite offensive line facing a very young defense. I'm not 100% in on Jonathan Taylor for a single entry lineup because the touchdowns may not break his way. But I think if I'm ranking them for single entry, it is CEH number 1. CEH is the first guy I lock in. Taylor might be 2, and then I'm deciding between Zeke and Henry for that third slot. So I think these 4 running backs are my core for this week. Is there anyone you would put in that same tier as them?
Wait, who was it?
CEH, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, and Zeke Elliott. Is anyone else you're putting in that exact same tier from an exposure perspective this week?
No. I think it's those 4.
I agree. Let's move down to wide receiver. Who stands out to you there this week?
Yeah, the reason I was not fully paying attention was I just read the most recent Roto World blurb on my first love, Mike Evans.
What's that?
Bucs head coach Bruce Arians said the team was, quote, careful how many times, end quote, Mike Evans ran downfield routes in week 1. And that Arians said, quote, he feels bad, end quote, when Evans doesn't get to double-digit targets.
So Bruce Arians is actually you on Slack because the number of times I've received a message from Brandon Gadula with the phrase, feels bad, nothing else.
No, feels bad, man.
Sorry, feels bad, man, yes. So Bruce Arians is Brandon.
Yeah, so... I was just like...
Narrative. Let's go.
Just double checking here. So whether Godwin plays or not, I know we talk about on this podcast, if a stud wide receiver is out, it hurts an offense. To me, it hurts the offense more if Mike Evans is not out there than Chris Godwin, because Mike Evans is kind of the GOAT for me. And look, if you spend down for Jonathan Taylor, you're either going to spend up for McCaffrey or like Devontae and Julio and Hopkins. So possibly, and I don't know the sentiment on FanShare yet, but Mike Evans could go a little bit overlooked. Probably not come Sunday, but I'm okay with it either way. Just 4 targets in week 1. 2 of those came against Marshawn Lattimore. But he ran every pass route despite, their quote-unquote care for not getting him out there too much. 11.8 yard average target depth. Tom Brady on the deep passes looked pretty good, so I want to go hard at Mike Evans this week. My second love, there are a lot of wide receivers I like, but for stacking purposes, I really like Terry McLaurin. $6,500 salary for him. Should be a bit of a shootout game, up-tempo game like Jim already talked about. He is another wide receiver who ran every pass route in week 1, and if I can get someone who has the ability of Terry McLaurin in a game like this, who's going to run pretty much every route, I like that. He had 7 targets, one of them deep, one of them in the red zone. The volume should be there. He's a really key piece to bring back stacks for me when I'm stacking up Arizona and Washington, which I will do a lot. My third love, kind of cheating here. I'm picking two because it's Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb. Gallup's salary is $6,000. CeeDee Lamb is $52,000. Lamb ran 93% of the routes according to Pro Football Focus. Gallup ran every route in week 1. Lamb had 5 targets. Gallup had 6. Gallup, though, really empty, 15.2 yard average target depth. They each had a downfield target. CeeDee Lamb got a red zone target as well. So I think from a strict value standpoint, Lamb is the better play. But from a strict tournament standpoint, Gallup is probably going to be too unpopular. And I want a lot of Michael Gallup because we love Michael Gallup on this podcast.
CeeDee Lamb is very high in fan share tags. Michael Gallup is lower. So your read on that sentiment is correct. And I agree that Michael Gallup is a really good tournament play. My first love, speaking of the Cowboys, is Amari Cooper. He's only $7,000. And as much as I love Gallup and Lamb, Cooper is also undersalaried at $7,000. I mentioned before the home road splits for Dak. And again, I don't look at home road splits for whatever 1 divided by 32 is, or 31 divided by 32 is. I don't look at that for 97% of the team. I do for the Cowboys. I don't care. Last year, Amari averaged 12.97 yards per target at home compared to 6.15 on the road. And I think it matters more when a team plays indoors. I know they were indoors last week too and didn't do anything, but Amari did have 14 targets last week while facing Jalen Ramsey. Now goes to a spot where I expect their offensive efficiency to increase. He averaged 108.6 yards per game at home last year. Again, it is bad process to value home road splits. If you're trying to listen to this from a process perspective, do not do this for most teams. However, the Cowboys are different, so give me all the Amari Cooper. Michael Gallup is right there too, though. My second love is Robert Woods, who is $6,700 because we saw the massive target share that Woods got at the end of last year carry over into week 1. After his 1-game absence last year, Woods had 28% of the Rams' overall targets, 27% of the deep targets, and 20% of the red zone targets. He had 8 targets in week 1. That was 29%, so pretty much in line with last year. He had 1 deep target, 2 in the red zone. I think that Woods is a cash game option. I think he's awesome for tournaments. Last year, there were 2 wide receivers who made the perfect lineup with no touchdowns. Both of them were Bobby Trees, Robert Woods. So $6,700, please score a touchdown this week. But if he doesn't, he can still pay off. My third love is Deshaun Jackson because there is some risk here. He gets shadowed by Jalen Ramsey. So D-Jax is not a cash game play. But I do think he's in a good buy low spot here. He still had 7 targets in week 1 despite limited snaps where I thought he was hurt. He tweeted he wasn't, despite the fact he was laying on the ground getting attended to. He was fun. He's having fun, doing some snow angels. 6 of those targets were deep. People won't be going here after he let them down while popular last week. At least I hope they won't. And he's $5,500. I would say that Jalen Reagor at $5,100 works. Scotty Miller is $52,000. I like him. Paris Campbell at $53,000. Like Brandon said, I will echo it. Take chances on high A-dot wide receivers. Scotty Miller won't be that, but he could be. I guess he's fast, he could. But Reagor will be. D-Jax will be. It seems like Paris Campbell will be too. So gamble on them in week number 2. Moving down to tight end, Brandon, who do you have there?
Tight end's always tough because the guys who make the most sense are really high salaried. And the usual checklist for tight ends is home favorites with high implied team totals. If you kind of go by that, it's the high salary guys and Dalton Schultz at $4,000, which I think is a viable punt option. Okay, you didn't pick 100%, him.
100%.
So this goes against the process, but I like Hunter Henry at 61. The Chargers are run heavy, but Henry, if week 1 is any indication, and I don't see why it wouldn't be, he's one of 3 guys who's going to get targets, maybe 4 if you give Austin Eckler more targets, which I would expect, but he had 8 targets. He had 2 downfield targets and 2 red zone targets, which for a tight end is pretty much, it's not unheard of, but it's, on par with the guys who are, an extra $1,000 in terms of salary. He ran 91% of the routes, so not a lot of blocking. I don't like to look too much at snap rates if I can avoid it for tight ends, but it's a really good role for a tight end. They should have to throw. Henry can get 25, 30-yard catches. He's one of the few tight ends who can do that. So I think he's in play for stacks. I think a much more viable cash game play is Dallas Goedert at $5,500 in terms of salary. 62% of the routes, so not nearly as high as Hunter Henry, but 9 targets. He had a deep target, a red zone target. Close game against the Rams. Should be back and forth. I think the salary is just probably too low for Goddard a little bit. So from a cash game standpoint, Goddard fits without punting completely.
Goddard would have been one of my picks had you not taken him, so I agree. He's a really good play. $5,500. That'll work. I think that he's a good option. My first love is Hayden Hurst because I always want to find ways to get low salaried access to really fun games, and Hayden Hurst is the lowest salary way to get access outside of CeeDee Lamb and Russell Gage. And Hayden Hurst did not get that many targets last week, but that was against Bobby Wagner and Jamal Adams. The Cowboys don't have Sean Lee. They don't have Leighton Vander Esch. They're both on IR. So Hayden Hurst makes it a lot easier to stack this game. I know he didn't do a lot in week 1, but I'm willing to get in on him here when everyone else is jumping ship. I think it's a good time. Kind of similar thought process with Ian Thomas. He's down to $5,000, but he gets me exposure to an offense I expect to throw the ball a bunch here. Thomas ran 27 routes in week number 1. 13 of those were in the slot, and 6 were out wide. He actually ran only 8 inline routes, according to Pro Football Focus. I would also consider Eric Ebron at $4,900. He did run a route on just about 2/3 of dropbacks in week 1, so that's why I decided to go with Thomas over Ebron, but I think they're both low salary tight ends who I like. I agree that Dalton Schultz is not going to be my highest exposure tight end, but if I really want to go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, I will go with Dalton Schultz as a tight end option. Let's finish up. Go ahead.
Talk to me about your boy Logan Thomas.
He's number 1 in Fanshare tags right now. He's $4,700. I think that's a very good salary.
Tight ends are tough.
Yeah, and
he was 3rd in route rate among tight ends.
No, his usage was amazing last week. So I think the hype around him is justified.
Yeah, Evan Ingram, 98% of the routes. Clear, I just wanted to throw that out there. That's insane for a tight end.
I'm going to use Logan Thomas, but I'm also very okay. Only. No, I don't think stacks only. I think he's okay as a one-off too. If I want to spend down, but like you said, high popularity tight ends have very, 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 very bad hit rates, and it's not because they don't hit minimum thresholds of value. It's because they don't have ceilings. I think Thomas is a path to a ceiling, so I think that he's a straight up good play. But I'm also okay deviating from that chalk.
Okay.
That's the way I'd phrase that. Speaking of Logan Thomas, who's your defense for this week?
Arizona. I think this number is right.
Yeah, they're $3,600.
36.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm shocked too.
So Dwayne Haskins, 38% passing success rate last week. 0.01 passing the expected points per dropback, well below league average. 3 sacks. If the game goes as I plan, he should be forced to throw, which is always fun. And there should be a lot of plays, which means a lot of dropbacks. So havoc from quarterbacks who aren't necessarily the best quarterbacks can lead to FanDuel points. You don't want low total games with not a lot of plays because you need sacks, you need turnovers from your defenses. So Arizona, I think, fits that for sure.
I agree. They're my number 1 defense this week. They're not a great defense talent-wise, but I care like you more about situation than talent. Speaking of that, I guess situation-wise, it makes sense to talk about Tampa Bay. They're my number 1 defense for this, or my love for this week at $3,800. I am the biggest Teddy Bridgewater fan you will ever meet, or virtually meet, I guess. I don't know, unless we meet. Weird. I don't know. Whatever. I'm the biggest Teddy Bridgewater fan you will ever virtually meet. And I like this Carolina offense a lot. But they're going to throw a lot. That's a huge thing for an opposing defense. They're also likely to be playing from behind, which jacks up that volume even more. Tampa Bay can get after the quarterback. One of Teddy's flaws, if I am to slander my boy, is that he will hold on to the ball too long occasionally. So I prefer Arizona, but Tampa is a good play too. I very briefly considered talking about Miami because Josh Allen. I thought better of it eventually, so be proud of me for rethinking that. But their corners are good. They're at home. Josh Allen is erratic, so I'm just saying Miami is in play. I want to try to get to Chicago at times because Daniel Jones loves nothing more than just getting absolutely rocked. So the Bears are 4,000. I would say Bears, Bucks, Cardinals are the top ones, and I will sprinkle in some Dolphins because of my blind hatred towards Josh Allen. I don't actually hate him, but people think I do, and they're not entirely wrong. I don't hate him. I just like him less than others.
I'm just going to let you struggle.
Fair enough. Anything else you got for this week, Brandon? Are we good to go?
I think we're good. I think we're good. Again, we really stuck to like those 8 top games in terms of over under. You could maybe think that some of these other games are the ones to stack, which all power to you. But I think you can differentiate so many ways while still sticking in these games that should score the most points.
Try to find ways, like Brandon was talking about, to decipher which of those games will be less popular. And if you think that it's going to hit the total or hit the over, then stack it up, because there are ways to be different without being dumb this week. And that's something we should always want for DFS. And like I said before, actually go through and rank out the running backs so you know how to prioritize them. That will make things a lot easier for this week. That is all the time that we have for today here on the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, but a lot of other stuff here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. We already have our UFC DFS podcast with Austin Swain that has been posted for Saturday's 14-fight card. I'll have a NASCAR podcast tomorrow for the Bristol night race. We have MLB DFS podcast every weekday as well. Tomorrow, we'll have our snake draft live stream with myself, Brandon, and JJ Zachariason, where they will have to we'll have to figure out who won that snake draft. I don't know. We'll have to go back and find the results about who drafted Devontae Adams and won as a result. We'll figure that out before then, though. But that's at 3:30 on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook pages. So make sure you subscribe there to get notifications as we go live. And also just subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Do not forget about the Listener League. The link for that is FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. And the link is also in the show notes. So get yourself entered. And if you get entered quick and we fill it quickly, make a bigger contest next week. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you in the most magnificent slate we're going to get this entire year. We'll talk to you again next week. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.